On the morning of January 27th, London did not look like a city on the verge of scandal. The sky hung low and silver above Buckingham Palace, tourists clustered behind iron gates, and the royal calendar moved with its usual rehearsed precision. Inside the communications wing, however, something shifted. An encrypted briefing, flagged urgent, appeared in the inbox of a senior private secretary. It was not tabloid speculation. It was not gossip. It was a warning. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you updated as everything unfolds. While you're here, tell us, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. It's amazing to see viewers joining us from all around the world. The message referenced unreleased digital material allegedly involving Lady Louise Windsor and her longtime companion. It implied reputational damage, hinted at public exposure, and suggested that certain institutional privileges could prevent escalation. There was no explicit ransom. There was no crude demand. Instead, there was leverage. And leverage, in royal terms, is more dangerous than money. Within 30 minutes, the memo reached Clarence House. By the hour mark, legal advisors were assembled under strict confidentiality protocols. The language used in the internal summary was precise, potential coercive media maneuver. That phrasing alone altered the tone of the day. This was no family disagreement. This was strategic pressure applied at a moment of visible vulnerability. Simultaneously, across the Atlantic, separate headlines were beginning to circulate. Production delays, suspended streaming projects, staff resignations from a high-profile foundation, industry whispers of collapsing partnerships. None of these developments were, on their own, catastrophic. Together, they formed a pattern: contraction, urgency, timing. Palace analysts noticed immediately. At Bagshot Park, Lady Louise herself had not yet been informed. Advisors debated the order of disclosure. Protect first, brief second. The instinct among senior women in the family was unified and immediate: shield her from spectacle. Louise had built a reputation on discretion, academic focus, and steady service. She was not accustomed to confrontation. She was certainly not prepared to become the axis of one. By mid-afternoon, a second communication arrived, this one clearer. It suggested that unless certain recognitions were restored, symbolic inclusion, institutional validation, the material would be addressed publicly through independent channels. The phrasing was careful, almost clinical, yet the implication was unmistakable. Compliance would ensure silence. Resistance would invite revelation. Princess Anne was briefed before sunset. Observers later described her reaction as restrained but cold. She asked only 3 questions: is the material authentic? Can it be traced? Who else has seen it? When informed that forensic indicators already suggested manipulation, her posture shifted from concern to resolve. "Then this is not exposure," she reportedly said. "It is construction." As evening settled over Windsor, Prince William and Princess Catherine were drawn into the loop. The tone of the gathering was not theatrical. No raised voices, no visible panic. Instead, a shared recognition that this episode marked a turning point. The monarchy had weathered scandal before. It had endured interviews, memoirs, televised grievances. But synthetic media, timed against professional decline and framed as moral revelation, represented a new battlefield. Outside palace walls, speculation grew without specifics. Social platforms buzzed with vague hints of a coming truth. Commentators sensed tension but lacked detail. That ambiguity created oxygen, and oxygen feeds narrative. Shortly before midnight, a closed-door meeting was convened in a private chamber at Windsor Castle. Legal counsel, digital forensic consultants, and communications directors presented preliminary findings. Early analysis pointed to metadata inconsistencies, environmental mismatches, and digital layering anomalies consistent with artificial assembly. The conclusion was not yet formal, but directionally clear. The threat relied on perception, not proof. King Charles was briefed in person. According to a senior aide, he listened without interruption, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. When the summary ended, he spoke quietly. "This is no longer a family matter," he said. "It is an institutional test." And so the posture shifted. No public statement would be issued. No defensive interview granted. The palace would not validate implication by engaging it prematurely. Instead, a containment strategy began forming: evidence first, optics second, response last. Protect the individual, fortify the institution, allow facts to dismantle fiction. In California, preparations for a forthcoming media release continued. Promotional assets were being finalized, teaser clips cued. The framing centered on empowerment, transparency, long-suppressed truths. The contrast between tone and intent deepened the tension. By dawn, London still looked calm. The guards changed posts. The gates opened to visitors. Official engagements remained on schedule. Yet beneath that composure, something fundamental had shifted. The monarchy understood it was no longer defending against accusation. It was confronting engineered doubt. And doubt, once seated, can travel faster than truth. By the following morning, the palace machine was no longer reacting. It was calibrating. Overnight assessments from digital forensics teams had transformed suspicion into structured analysis. Screens inside a secure briefing room displayed frame-by-frame breakdowns of the alleged material. Light sources that did not align, reflections that behaved unnaturally, timestamps that skipped rather than flowed. To an untrained viewer, the footage suggested intimacy and secrecy. To specialists, it suggested assembly. The distinction mattered enormously. Authentic scandal demands explanation. Manufactured scandal demands exposure of the method. Senior advisors understood that the battle would not be fought in courtrooms alone. It would unfold in the realm of credibility, where perception moves faster than verification. A strategy emerged built on three principles: never appear defensive, never attack personally, and never release information without irrefutable backing. The monarchy would not argue with speculation. It would outlast it. Meanwhile, protective measures quietly expanded around Lady Louise. Her scheduled appearances were not canceled outright. Instead, they were adjusted, softened, reframed as private engagements rather than public ceremonies. The goal was not retreat, but insulation. Those close to her described a young woman unsettled by the sudden distortion of her ordinary life, yet determined not to vanish behind palace walls. Prince William took an increasingly operational role, reviewing briefings with the precision of someone accustomed to crisis planning. He was less concerned with headlines than with precedent. If reputational pressure could be weaponized once, it could be weaponized again. The institution, he insisted, must treat this moment as the opening chapter of a new media era rather than an isolated dispute. Across the ocean, momentum built toward the planned podcast release that insiders believed would frame the narrative publicly. Promotional language leaned heavily on themes of accountability and suppressed voices. To audiences unfamiliar with the deeper conflict, it sounded like another installment in a long-running personal story. Inside royal circles, however, it was interpreted as an attempt to define reality before verification could catch up. Legal teams on both sides began maneuvering without visible confrontation. Draft filings were prepared but not submitted. Letters were composed but held. Every move was timed against the possibility that escalation might itself provide the publicity being sought. Silence, carefully maintained, became an instrument rather than an absence. Princess Anne remained the most unambiguous voice within internal discussions. She rejected emotional framing entirely, insisting the issue be treated as a technical falsification paired with reputational coercion. Her approach influenced the tone of the response: clinical, evidence-driven, almost austere. There would be no theatrical rebuttal, no public indignation, only methodical dismantling. At the same time, communications advisors monitored the digital landscape with microscopic attention. Online discourse was fragmenting into camps, some suspicious of manipulation, others convinced that hidden truths were finally surfacing. Analysts mapped the spread of hashtags, and discussion clusters the way epidemiologists track contagion. Narrative, they knew, behaves like weather. It cannot be stopped, only redirected. Behind closed doors, the king approved a phased disclosure plan. If the material appeared publicly, the palace would answer within hours, not days, armed with verified forensic conclusions. If it did not appear, they would wait, allowing uncertainty to erode its own credibility. Either path required discipline measured not in statements, but in restraint. For Lady Louise, the experience was profoundly personal amid the strategic choreography. She continued reading briefing summaries herself, asking direct questions about authenticity, motive, and consequence. Those present noted that her composure, though hard won, became a quiet source of resolve for others. The attempt to portray her as vulnerable had, paradoxically, strengthened her position internally. As the anticipated release window approached, tension shifted from fear of exposure to anticipation of confrontation. Both camps appeared committed, both aware that retreat would be interpreted as admission. The difference lay in tempo. One side relied on immediacy, the other relied on endurance. In crises shaped by information, time itself becomes a weapon, and time, the palace believed, was finally moving in its favor. As the release window finally arrived, the atmosphere on both sides of the Atlantic shifted from preparation to impact. The podcast episode went live in the early hours, introduced not with accusation, but with implication. Its tone was reflective, almost philosophical, weaving themes of exclusion, silence, and personal cost into a narrative that never named its targets directly, yet left little doubt about where listeners were meant to look. For a brief moment, the strategy seemed to work. Social platforms ignited with speculation. Commentators dissected every phrase, every pause, every carefully shaped anecdote. The absence of explicit claims created a vacuum, and the vacuum filled instantly with interpretation. It was precisely the ambiguity that made the message travel so quickly. Inside palace offices, however, the reaction was neither alarm nor outrage. Analysts had anticipated this structure. The episode contained suggestion rather than evidence, emotion rather than verification. That distinction triggered the second phase of the response. Within hours, independent digital laboratories, already contracted quietly weeks earlier, released synchronized findings to regulatory bodies and select media institutions. Their reports were technical, unemotional, and devastatingly precise. Waveform inconsistencies, layered rendering artifacts, behavioral modeling errors in facial microexpressions. The supposed footage could not exist in a single continuous recording. It had been assembled, processed, and refined through advanced synthetic techniques. The conclusion did not accuse, it demonstrated. Journalists who initially approached the story as scandal began reframing it as a case study in digital manipulation. Technology correspondents replaced gossip columnists on broadcast panels. The conversation moved away from personalities and toward the growing global anxiety about artificial media and reputational sabotage. The ground beneath the original narrative began to shift. Prince William observed the transition closely. What concerned him was not vindication, but recognition of how narrowly the situation had balanced. Had the evidence arrived even a day later, perception might have hardened beyond repair. The realization reinforced his push for long-term institutional adaptation to an era where authenticity itself must be defended proactively. Princess Catherine focused instead on the human dimension. She arranged for Lady Louise to continue selected engagements, not as defiance, but as continuity. Appearances were deliberately modest: educational visits, private meetings, discussions centered on youth and ethics. Each moment communicated stability without ever referencing the controversy directly. Public sympathy followed naturally. Meanwhile, legal correspondence intensified behind closed doors. The language remained formal, restrained, but unmistakably firm. Requests for clarification were paired with documentation of falsification. Distribution partners were warned of liability should manipulated material continue to circulate. The conflict was being transferred from the emotional arena into the procedural one, where spectacle held far less power. Observers began noting a subtle reversal. The story that had threatened to destabilize the monarchy was becoming an international example of how influence campaigns could be engineered and dismantled. Academic institutions requested access to anonymized data from the forensic review. Policy groups cited the case in discussions about regulating synthetic media. What began as a personal dispute was evolving into something far broader. For Lady Louise, that transformation carried its own weight. She was no longer merely defending herself. She had become an unwilling symbol of a generational challenge. Those close to her saw determination replacing the earlier shock. She insisted on understanding the technology involved, spending time with advisors who explained how easily identity could now be imitated, reshaped, and weaponized. Across the divide, the anticipated groundswell of support failed to consolidate. Ambiguity, once an asset, became a liability when confronted with data. Without clear allegations to defend, the narrative struggled to maintain coherence. Media cycles, relentless as ever, began turning toward the implications of fabrication rather than the insinuations that had launched it. The confrontation had not ended, it had simply changed form. What remained was no longer a clash of voices, but a contest between permanence and provocation, between institutions built to endure and strategies designed to disrupt. And in that slower, quieter contest, momentum was beginning to settle decisively in one direction. The aftermath of the podcast episode revealed the full scope of strategic discipline within the royal household. With the immediate threat contained, attention turned to consolidating the defenses that had so successfully neutralized the attempt to manipulate public perception. What had begun as a targeted media confrontation evolved into a carefully coordinated demonstration of institutional resilience, one designed not only to protect individuals, but also to reinforce the structural integrity of the monarchy in an age of digital subversion. Princess Anne continued to oversee the forensic and legal containment operations. Her team meticulously cataloged every digital trace of manipulation, deepfake markers, altered metadata, inconsistencies in audio layering. These findings were compiled into comprehensive reports distributed to international media regulators and cybersecurity task forces. The objective was clear: ensure that any recurrence of similar tactics could be preemptively identified and neutralized. The depth of the analysis impressed global observers, many noting that the palace had essentially authored a modern playbook for digital reputational defense. Princess Catherine, working in tandem with Anne, prioritized the human element. Lady Louise Windsor, once a reluctant participant, emerged as a symbol of composure and ethical strength. Her public appearances were deliberately structured: engagements at educational institutions, discussions on youth digital literacy, and panels on ethical media consumption. Each event reinforced the narrative of stability and dignity, countering the intended effect of coercion. Louise, supported by her mother Sophie and mentored quietly by Catherine, began to articulate her own perspective on media integrity, youth responsibility, and the importance of evidence-based judgment in an era dominated by rapid information dissemination. The legal front remained active, with high court filings targeting both the alleged manipulated footage and any secondary dissemination by third parties. Injunctions were granted swiftly, setting legal precedent on the responsibilities of media platforms in cases of synthetic defamation. The palace also implemented ongoing monitoring protocols, combining cybersecurity, media analysis, and rapid response legal teams. These measures ensured that any attempt to exploit similar narratives would meet immediate resistance, reinforcing the concept that reputational attacks could be countered without surrendering to public spectacle. Meanwhile, the broader public and media reaction crystallized into recognition of the strategic sophistication employed. Journalists and analysts highlighted the contrast between the attempt to provoke scandal and the measured, methodical response of the royal family. What had initially appeared to be a crisis was now seen as a demonstration of principled stewardship, combining legal, technological, and human-centered approaches. Academic journals and think tanks referenced the case in discussions of digital ethics, demonstrating its wider implications beyond personal or familial reputation. Prince William, closely observing both media dynamics and institutional responses, noted the strategic significance of maintaining composure under pressure. He emphasized the importance of aligning public messaging with legal and ethical imperatives, avoiding reactive or emotionally driven responses. The coordinated efforts of Anne, Catherine, and Sophie served as a model, reinforcing the concept that resilience was as much about foresight and preparation as it was about immediate reaction. Within Buckingham Palace, the internal culture also shifted. Security protocols were refined to incorporate lessons from the confrontation, including verification standards for digital media and enhanced protective measures for younger family members. Communication channels between legal teams, security experts, and public relations staff were formalized into a permanent operational framework. This systemic improvement ensured that the institution could respond to threats with speed, precision, and cohesion. The culmination of these efforts manifested in a decisive moment: Lady Louise Windsor's first independent royal patronage, centered on youth media ethics and digital security. Felix Clamp, cleared of all fabricated allegations, co-hosted the inaugural summit, symbolizing not only the restoration of personal reputations, but also the proactive engagement of the next generation in addressing challenges born from modern media landscapes. Their collaboration highlighted a forward-looking approach, transforming a potentially destabilizing incident into a platform for education, awareness, and resilience. Finally, the episode cemented a broader narrative of principled stewardship. Princess Anne's assertion of legal and moral authority, Catherine's cultivation of composure and ethical clarity, and Sophie's maternal advocacy coalesced into an enduring example of institutional fortitude. The monarchy had demonstrated that reputation, ethics, and legacy could be protected not through reactionary spectacle, but through measured, disciplined, and preemptive action. In doing so, the royal household affirmed the enduring principle that true authority is exercised not merely in response to crisis, but through the deliberate and conscientious preservation of integrity, dignity, and trust. The digital confrontation, now contained and documented, became a turning point, a testament to strategy, restraint, and the capacity to convert vulnerability into a demonstration of lasting strength. It was not only a personal victory for Louise, Sophie, and Catherine, but a broader affirmation that principled leadership, grounded in preparation, collaboration, and foresight, remains the most enduring safeguard against manipulation, coercion, and the shifting tides of modern public perception. The monarchy emerged not just intact, but strengthened, its credibility, stability, and ethical framework reinforced for the challenges of a digitally complex future. The final phase of the crisis marked the consolidation of both reputation and strategy within the royal household. With immediate threats neutralized and legal injunctions firmly in place, the palace shifted focus from defense to long-term institutional fortification. The incident, once a potential scandal of historic proportions, had been transformed into a blueprint for resilience, demonstrating how coordinated, principled action could preserve both personal dignity and institutional legitimacy. Every detail of the response was examined, refined, and formalized to ensure that future challenges, digital, legal, or media-driven, could be met with the same precision and effectiveness. Princess Anne, steadfast and unyielding throughout the confrontation, continued to oversee forensic audits and digital security protocols. Her team expanded its scope to include predictive modeling, identifying potential future vectors of manipulation. Deepfake detection algorithms, metadata authentication tools, and advanced AI pattern recognition were integrated into an ongoing monitoring system. Reports were regularly disseminated to international cybersecurity and media oversight bodies, establishing a precedent for royal-led digital defense initiatives. Anne's meticulous approach ensured that no threat, regardless of origin or medium, would compromise the integrity of the household again. Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophie maintained their focus on the human dimension, ensuring that those affected by the crisis were both protected and empowered. Lady Louise Windsor, having endured targeted manipulation, was now positioned as a public advocate for ethical media and digital literacy. Her appearances, carefully structured, widely publicized, and strategically timed, emphasized transparency, responsibility, and moral courage. Each speech, panel, and educational initiative reinforced a narrative of dignity, integrity, and resilience, transforming the attempted scandal into a platform for advocacy. Louise's voice became a symbol of principled youth leadership, demonstrating that ethical clarity could prevail even in the most complex and manipulative environments. Legal and institutional measures were further strengthened to ensure sustainability. The palace codified protocols for handling digital threats, integrating legal recourse, cybersecurity, and public relations into a single coordinated framework. High court injunctions were extended to encompass not only the immediate parties, but also any potential secondary dissemination channels, setting new legal benchmarks for international digital defamation and reputational protection. Media platforms were formally notified of obligations to remove or flag synthetic content, ensuring that regulatory compliance became a proactive safeguard rather than a reactive measure. These steps reinforced the principle that digital threats, particularly those targeting minors or young public figures, would be met with swift, comprehensive, and enforceable action. Prince William, observing the interplay of legal, technological, and human factors, underscored the importance of foresight and coordination. He emphasized that true stewardship required not only responding to crises, but also anticipating them, designing systems that could withstand evolving threats while preserving ethical and legal standards. His leadership, in collaboration with Anne, Catherine, and Sophie, exemplified the strategic integration of operational planning, institutional knowledge, and public accountability. The royal household emerged as a model of proactive governance, demonstrating how transparency, preparation, and principled action could preserve both authority and trust. Public perception, once at risk of being dominated by sensationalist narratives, shifted decisively in favor of the household. Media analyses highlighted the contrast between Meghan Markle's reactive attempts at manipulation and the palace's deliberate, measured response. News outlets, opinion columns, and academic journals recognized the sophistication of the legal, technological, and human-centered approach, portraying the royal family as a resilient and adaptive institution. The narrative of scandal was replaced by one of ethical leadership, demonstrating that strategic composure and moral clarity could not only neutralize threats, but also enhance legitimacy and influence. The consolidation phase also included proactive initiatives aimed at systemic resilience. The royal household established partnerships with educational institutions, cybersecurity experts, and media literacy organizations. Workshops, summits, and public campaigns emphasized ethical content creation, responsible digital engagement, and the protection of minors in the public sphere. These initiatives extended the lessons of the crisis beyond the palace, positioning the household as a leader in shaping standards for digital responsibility and public discourse. By transforming a potentially destabilizing event into an opportunity for societal education, the monarchy reinforced its relevance and moral authority in a rapidly evolving media landscape. In parallel, the internal structure of the royal household was permanently strengthened. Communication protocols, cross-department coordination, and crisis response chains were codified into formal operational manuals. Security, legal, and public relations teams were integrated into a unified command framework, capable of rapid decision-making and adaptive strategy implementation. This institutional fortification ensured that the household could respond to future challenges with confidence, efficiency, and ethical consistency, maintaining the balance between transparency, discretion, and protective action. Finally, the resolution of the crisis was marked by tangible outcomes for the individuals involved. Lady Louise Windsor, now an emblem of principled resilience, assumed full royal patronage responsibilities in youth media ethics and digital security. Felix Clamp, fully exonerated, collaborated on initiatives promoting responsible AI usage and digital safeguarding. Princess Anne, Catherine, and Sophie emerged with reputations not only intact, but enhanced, their coordinated leadership demonstrating the enduring value of discipline, foresight, and ethical consistency. Even amidst unprecedented digital manipulation, the royal household preserved its integrity, transformed vulnerability into opportunity, and reinforced a legacy of principled stewardship. This closing phase underscored a fundamental truth. Authority is sustained not merely by titles or protocol, but by the capacity to act decisively, ethically, and strategically in moments of profound challenge. The attempted manipulation, while aggressive and highly sophisticated, ultimately revealed the strength of an institution grounded in preparation, foresight, and principled leadership. The monarchy's response, comprehensive, coordinated, and unwavering, ensured that reputations were protected, ethical standards upheld, and public trust reinforced. In the end, the incident became not a scandal, but a historic demonstration of institutional resilience, strategic foresight, and the enduring power of principled action.